Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. I am your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. And today I am joined by Eric Loucks, Ph.D. Associate Professor of Epidemiology, Behavioral and Social Sciences at Brown University, as well as Director of the Mindfulness Center at Brown. Today's topic is physical recreation and exercises, which we're going to explore from the aspect of healthy mind and healthy body, how to adapt healthy behavior in daily life. Let's learn together. Hi, Eric. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, really great to be here. Thanks for hosting me.
Thank you so much for being here. I know it's super late where you are. It is only morning here, but it's already evening there. And we love to take the time to talk to you from two different sides of the world. I know it's going to be a very, very dynamic conversation. And it's a topic that a lot of people on my team are excited to learn about because we have noticed that we just, sitting at our computer all day. And, this topic is definitely going to be super helpful. But before we go into that, we know that you are, interested and invested in so many different things, and your expertise area is mindfulness. So it'll be great if you could introduce a bit more about yourself to our audience and why you would like to talk about this topic today of physical recreation and exercises.
Sure. Yeah. It's a pleasure to be here. And I am trained as a cardiovascular physiologist and also a social epidemiologist. So I often look at biological mechanisms of how psychosocial factors can influence heart health. And about 12 years ago or so, I started to really see promising evidence around mindfulness interventions and with the potential for improving cardiovascular well-being. And then also have history as an athlete myself. Used to compete quite a bit in triathlons, and these days it's more in the category of like surfing and stuff. We've done some research with a mindfulness-based blood pressure reduction study that showed some impacts on particularly like sedentary activities, as well as a program in young adults called Mindfulness-Based College that also engage with physical activity and sedentary activities as well. So happy to share about some of my findings and knowledge in that area of physical activity, recreational activity, but also a lot through the lens of mindfulness. That's sort of my area of expertise.
Yeah, for sure. I think on this show we've actually mentioned mindfulness before, and what I learned from that previous conversation was when we are doing an activity that we're really invested in, like a physical activity, we're actually also practicing mindfulness. And because I understand that there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to mindfulness, and a lot of people think that it's like meditation and sitting in one place, while it's actually not. So that is super interesting that you mentioned that, and we're going to learn more about that in a little bit. But you mentioned surfing even before we started the recording, and just now you mentioned surfing, and it sounds like something that you're passionate about, some fun activity that you do on the side. So would you like to share a bit more about that? Where are you based, and how do you find surfing? When do you make time to do it?
I'm in Rhode Island in the east coast of the United States, and you might have heard about some of the hurricanes coming up the east coast these days. So that kicks up waves for us that we get to surf. So we had some really good stuff last week, for example. And making the time for it, It's often first thing in the morning, and which is often one of the best times condition wise anyway before the wind comes up, and then that has a bit of less impact on my family and stuff too because I go often before they wake up. So I've got
Yeah.
12-year-old twin daughters that
Aw.
are also into the sport too,
Yeah.
um, and so it's been fun to
Yeah.
go with them as well.
Yeah. So they surf as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, what a
they're
fun
getting
activity for
pretty good.
such a nice
Yeah,
activity for family time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think by this point, myself included, our audience also, we have got to know you a little bit better, and we'll definitely learn more about your expertise area, and especially about a topic that a lot of people dread, like physical exercises, because we are probably not doing enough of that. But before we go into the detail of the episode, we would like to invite you to share some recommendations with us, because that would help us to learn more about yourself as well as getting some really fun recommendations. So, the
Mm.
first thing we always ask, and this is my favorite, is what is a book you would recommend?
One that I'm reading right now is called "The Body Keeps the Score," and it's a pretty powerful one
It
that
is.
really looks at how our life, including our early life, shows up in our body,
Yeah.
and so it really connects the mind to the body very well with a lot of rigorous evidence and stuff too. So
Yeah.
I've been appreciating that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I just finished that book not long ago, and
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
I finished reading it, and I had a moment with my friend. I was like, I messaged her after I read the book, because we meant to read it together, but she finished first, and so
Mm.
we were talking about all the insights that were discussed, and I was kind of jokingly saying to her, I after finishing this book, I don't know what happened in my childhood. Like I, you know, like did I have trauma? Like maybe I did without knowing. It's
Yeah.
so interesting to go through all of that, and I think it's not an easy read for a lot of us, but yeah, very important to learn from all of those chapters. Each one is
Yeah.
a roller coaster, I would say.
Yeah. It's intense. Yeah.
Yeah, super
And
intense.
I've done a lot of work on research on like social determinants of health. So impacts of things like racial discrimination or
Mm,
poverty or low education or
yeah.
abuse. And one of the reasons I went into mindfulness is I wanted to do something about it. Here I was documenting, the biological signatures of all those difficult challenges.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine, I was going on a bike ride with him once, and he's like, "Who's the main consumer of your work?" And I realized at that point the main consumer of my work was other academics, and
Yeah.
and like it would get into Time Magazine or something just as like an interesting thing. Like,
Yeah.
look, inflammatory markers are influenced by people's levels of social isolation, but
Mm,
I just wasn't feeling like I was having an impact as much as I'd like, and so mindfulness training is a very practical way to potentially help heal the past in the present moment, to be able
yeah.
to look at the challenges that have come up in our lives and to hold them with kindness and care. And after time, start to look at the roots of them and then to skillfully respond to whatever those roots are. So
Yeah.
it's one of the reasons why I like that book is it documents the evidence of it, but also gives pass out
Mm,
and through it too. So
yeah,
just
for sure.
appreciated it.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
definitely strikes a lot of compassion within ourselves, because I think
Mm.
what I definitely took away from that is there's so much to a person that you don't know about, and oftentimes we're really quick to judge, but we don't know the backstory and whatever happened in their childhood, in their early years. And people
Mm.
change, people grow, and being able to
Yeah.
just keep that in mind helps a lot, because it's just, for me personally, helps me to reduce the tendency to judge. Why is this person behaving this way? It's more like, oh, okay, I observe
Uh-huh.
this behavior. I understand there might be more to why they're behaving this way. I accept that, and
Hmm.
I move on, in seeing how I can actually interact. And yeah,
Mm.
I think it's very
Yeah, it's
interesting.
a good point.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This Zen master named Thich Nhat Hanh did quite a bit of calligraphy. And I remember one of his calligraphy said, understanding is the foundation of love.
Mm.
And so if we can really understand where someone's coming from and what their experiences are, that can lead to uh, uh, love and kindness towards them.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Very nice start to the list of recommendation for sure. For those who haven't read that, I think highly, highly recommend. What about a movie that you would recommend, Eric?
That I'd recommend.
Or just a movie that you
Having
like?
kids, I don't watch a lot of movies, honestly, but the ones I do watch are with my daughters
Okay.
and my wife. And so I guess one that comes to mind that's like one of our favorites is Moana.
Oh, that's such a
That's
nice
a
one.
powerful movie with a strong female lead who's got a lot of courage
I
and
know.
humor. And
Yeah.
I like the diversity of the movie too. You know, the main characters are Polynesian, and so often with kids' movies, the characters are white, and it's nice to see lots of
Yeah.
diversity in that regard too.
Yeah.
So that's been a favorite of our family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Such a
Yeah.
good one in all the
Yeah.
points that you just made. How about a podcast? Because we are doing a podcast with you now. We wonder if you listen to any
Yes.
podcasts you would recommend.
Yeah. I mean, two that I've been into lately. One is the Contemplative Science podcast that brings together just science with contemplative practices. And that's a fun one. They actually had me on their podcast a couple weeks ago, which brought me towards it. But I've been listening to other episodes on it too, and it's been good.
Hmm.
And then also the Surgeon General of the United States has come out with a podcast called House Calls, and he's bringing in some really insightful people onto it, all the way from like chefs to meditation experts to a professor at Yale who teaches a course on happiness and stuff. So I've been those have been two of my favorite ones I've been listening to. But
Wow. We didn't
yeah,
get
looking
just,
forward to listening to yours now too as
yeah,
it launches today.
thanks.
Right, today is the
Yeah,
day.
thanks. Today's
Yeah,
the day.
congratulations.
Oh, thank
Yeah,
you. Yeah, for those who don't understand what's going on, we've been pre-recording a bunch of podcasts, and the day that we are recording this episode is actually the day that we're also going to release our podcast. So that's very exciting. So maybe
yeah,
when people see this in the future, the past will make sense. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Anyways, yeah. I think it's gonna be really fun. And we didn't get just one recommendation from you, but two. So that's very exciting. Thank you. I'm gonna put them on my list as well. I'm trying to listen to more podcasts because ever since we started, recording the show, I actually stopped listening to podcast interestingly enough. So now I'm slowly getting back into it. need to
Yeah,
need to
it's
do
like you're
that.
listening to them live instead.
Yeah, exactly. Because I get to talk to amazing experts like yourself. So well, that's my dose of podcasts weekly
Right.
already. But yeah, it would be
Yeah.
really fun to get back into listening to more podcasts. And the next one I always like to ask is what um actually no, who is your role model? And it could be a famous person or it could be a regular person in your circle. It doesn't have to be a famous
Mm.
person.
Hmm. Yeah, I have many, but one that comes to mind is Mahatma Gandhi. So he had a great deal of courage and a great moral compass, and really stood up for those who were less empowered to be able to stand up for themselves. And I also appreciate like he has an autobiography um, where he talks about how he didn't feel like he was particularly smart and didn't do particularly well in school and stuff, and that but what he did do is he treated his life as an experiment so
Hmm.
that he would try something,
Yeah.
and if it worked well he'd continue doing it, and if it didn't work well he'd stop.
Hmm.
And I really appreciated that. And with mindfulness, and even when we look at our relationship with physical activity, we can try things that work, and if they make us feel better, continue doing them, and if they make us feel worse, to stop. It's so simple. It's not so easy to do, but it's such a simple, powerful concept that's
Yeah.
inspired me for many years.
Yeah, that sounds really inspiring, actually. And I think it's so interesting listening to people's different role models. And sometimes even hearing the reason why it's so powerful it's kind of like a source of inspiration for me because we all, think about different figures in different ways. And for some people, that person is not famous. For some others, it's maybe a person like, your role model that everyone knows about, but the way that you relate to this particular person is completely different from how another person would relate to this person. So I find it to be really
Mm.
fascinating. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the last one on this recommendation list is not a recommendation per se, but I think it's more so on the spirit of learning. We always like to ask our guest about a course that they've recently completed or a course that they completed and they really like. I know that you're also a professor yourself. I believe it's going to be tricky because you're thinking, I teach so much. Which one am I going to choose from? The list of the one that I've actually completed. So yeah, this one might be tricky but fun at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the more powerful courses that I took as an adult was mindfulness-based stress reduction.
Hmm.
That was developed by John Kabat-Zinn and has been tested in clinical trials now for almost 40 years. And it really helped bring my personal mindfulness practice in together with the science of it.
Yeah.
And as such, inspired me to not only deepen my practice, my mindfulness practice, but also to really look at the impacts of mindfulness on physical health as well as mental health.
Hmm.
So that was a powerful one for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I can see that now because it is also your expertise area and you keep learning about it. And yeah, I think that's a really nice message to everyone. Even if you are
Mm-hmm.
very experienced yourself, there's just no one stopping you from learning even more, and nothing would stop you from that. It's actually a really good thing to do. So it's very inspiring. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Cool. So now let's go into the exciting part where we actually learn more about your expertise, talk more about this topic. Before we go into physical recreation and exercises and mindfulness, your expertise, let's talk about well-being because our show is about well-being. So let's start broad. What does well-being mean to you?
Yeah. You know, one of my favorite definitions of well-being or health is actually the World Health Organization definition that came out, I think, in 1948. And their definition is that it's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And so, when I think about well-being, I'm often I often think of it as more almost on the flourishing side than just the absence of being sick. Like,
Mm,
yay, I don't have heart disease, or yay, I don't have depression, but really well-being has that kind of wellness side of things that allow us to live a full and healthy and happy life. And how can we create conditions that allow for that alongside having the absence of disease? But disease happens, and are there ways to have well-being even if we have certain conditions that are going alongside it, and as many of us do.
mm. Yeah, it sounds like to you this definition is broader than the sense of just having well-being in your life. It brings you to a space where you can flourish too, and I think that's very different. Again, each person has such a different
Mm,
definition when it comes to this topic, but yeah, I think flourishing is something that not all of us are experiencing right now. And I guess the conversation that we're gonna
mm,
have about the topic of today might actually help us to get there, because to me personally, I don't think I'm at a stage where I can say I'm flourishing. My well-being
mm,
is
yeah.
my well-being is maintained, is managed. I understand what's going on, and like you said, it's not the absence of all of the um, unfortunate unfortunate things that might happen to your health and other aspects, physical and mental wise. But yeah, like I
Hmm.
think to reach that state of flourishing, I'm very curious, how can we get there? And um, in the
Hmm.
context of well-being, like what would be some of the things that maybe we haven't looked at, as humans? And one of the other things that would be related to this is it might be because we have a lot of misconceptions when it comes to well-being. You've brought us your definition.
Mm,
I've picked on I've picked up on the word flourishing. I really enjoy hearing that. But to you, what are some of the misconceptions that you've picked up when you interact with people when it comes to well-being?
Misconceptions.
Yeah. What do we get wrong when it comes
I
to
mean, like
well-being?
one thing that I see, like I just came out with a book on mindfulness for young adults, so I'm working a lot with young adults right now. But when we look, say, on social media and stuff, and we look at Instagram or whatever we do for images, often some of the people, like I had a young woman who went through one of my programs and was suffering with an eating disorder like bulimia, and she was a beautiful person, and she was telling me about how she'd kind of gotten hooked on social media, just seeing how people looked, and that women who looked like healthy and beautiful actually like weren't. They're just too skinny for health, for good health,
Oh my
and how
gosh.
she had strived for that herself, and
Mm,
in doing so, became much less happy and actually less healthy as well.
yeah.
And it wasn't until she realized that framing around it, and that she started to uh, deleted some of her image related social media accounts and talked with her friends a lot about it, who also shared this similar challenge, and that she was able to release herself from trying to model herself after how other people look, and in the process actually became healthier and happier herself.
Mm.
So I think some misconceptions can be through the visual media that we're all exposed to right now, that when we see someone who's maybe smiling and looking really good on camera, are they really healthy and
Yeah.
happy, or are they just kind of being paid and being
Mm,
digitally altered to
so
look that way?
true.
So that's one thing that I certainly hear is up with young adults right now.
Yeah, that is so true because I mean the camera only captures a moment. And you don't
Yeah.
interact if you don't interact with that person, you've no idea what's going on. And that's such a good point because
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because it seems like the topic of today, I just mentioned. We had another recording today and we were kind of talking about the same thing, when it comes to social media. And it's,
Mm.
it's so damaging to everyone, not just young people, but I would say everyone who's, you know, constantly checking social media. We would notice this. Oh, this person's smiling and they look so thin and healthy, but when you strive to lose weight or smile in front of the camera, are you actually happy? Like that is another completely different thing. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's sometimes really sad to think about how we have to portray a certain image to the world, and I think for me personally, I've just noticed that there's no need to do that actually. You can share if you're sad. Why not? Like why do we have to
Hmm.
constantly say that we are happy and only share about the highlights and the healthiest of moments? Because what I've noticed is when people open up about their struggles and they talk about how they've overcome certain challenges, that is where I really see the essence of well-being. It's there. It's
Hmm.
not about I'm happy, I'm healthy all the time, but about I went through this with my well-being. I definitely did
Hmm.
not have a great journey, but I got here. I went through all of this and now I'm okay. And
Hmm.
like I talked to I think I talked to a couple of friends recently because two of my really close friends, they just had kids recently and they went through a whole process of change. And
Hmm.
on social media, obviously as new parents, they want to share happy images, but what is behind those images? Actually, struggling new parents, lost sleep,
Hmm.
they're tired. They are definitely really happy and thrilled that they have, brought this new human into life. But yeah, there's just so much misconception that stop them from actually work on their well-being. If they're only focusing on sharing things on social media, like you said, it's
Hmm.
such a huge issue nowadays. Honestly,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like a new tool, and I sometimes think of it like humans have developed all these tools over the generations, and we keep the ones that continue to benefit us, and then we change the ones that are kind of mixed benefit. And so with social media, or like with digital media, it's amazing in so many ways. Like, my kids weren't able to see their grandparents in person for 2.5 years because of the pandemic. My parents live in Canada, and I live in the US right now. And so with Zoom and video conferencing, it really fostered a better quality relationship with your grandparents, a lot more joy. So, like, how can we take digital media or social media to do the wonderful things and then kind of drop out,
Yeah.
the stuff involved with like
Yeah.
craving and addiction and,
For sure.
judgment and,
Yeah.
all that stuff. And it's an
100%.
open question right now, but it's such a new tool that
Yeah. It
I hope
is.
we'll continue to
Yeah.
refine it.
Yeah. 100%. It is. Like, it's such a big thing to talk about. And I started reading this book recently called Stolen Focus by Johan Hari. And it's,
Okay.
it talks about how we just lose all of our focus. There's no flow in our lives. And it's related to well-being too. And I think one of the key things is the author was really honest in saying, like, I just reach for my phone. And he was
Mm.
trying to detox, like, actually, like you said, it would be really nice to balance it out, enjoy the nice aspects of the internet, being on social media and other tools that we can get access to. But on the other hand, how do we do that? It's such a hard thing to cut out everything else and just focus on the good part. And the author tried to not use anything. He even tried to buy a flip phone, I think, and he couldn't find any. And because like, try to buy a phone that doesn't have
Yeah.
access to the internet. And during the first few days that he was on this retreat of no internet, no social media, he kept reaching for his phone. And I feel like,
Mm.
we might go through the same thing if we were to try the same experiment. And it's such a hard thing to accomplish. Um, and I think it's interesting to me noticing all these things in the context of today's topic is because we're talking about, physical activities. And you know what? I've realized we bring our phone everywhere. Like, for me, for example, right? I am guilty of that. I go for a run. What do I bring? My phone. I don't know.
Mm.
I just felt so attached. And I just couldn't, like,
Yeah.
like, get away from that, because I don't know, like, I fear something might happen, like I might get lost, or like I might need to
Hmm.
access my Apple Wallet. I don't know. I was like, I just feel
Hmm.
a constant need to, like, bring something, the phone. I didn't bring my wallet, but I brought my phone. So it's just so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just such a thing to think about. And yeah, and in today's topic, let's talk about that, because we are talking about physical recreation and exercises. We all know what they are, but
Mm.
there might be a lot of challenges. And so, you know what would what are some of your observations given your work, because you are really involved in this work, and also maybe some backstories about mindfulness too would be very beneficial.
Hmm. Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, say continuing with like how you were sharing with like bringing the phone on runs and stuff. Like we had a student who went through one of my mindfulness programs, and he liked to run a lot, and he would always do it, with his headphones on and listening to music, and that would like give him some energy, and he'd just like zip along and just kind of be in the music and stuff and get the run done. I had another student who mostly exercised kind of for body image stuff too, and so she would often be tuned in, just be on a treadmill and like looking at a screen and just like getting the exercise done with to get it over with, so she looked better and stuff. And then but didn't really enjoy it, so would kind of use the phone or the digital stuff as a distraction. And as both of them went through the mindfulness training, they started unplugging during their runs, and just kind of being there with their body. And so when we train people with through the mindfulness lens with physical activity, we often do like a particular mindfulness practice, where we start off with just a bit of a meditation where we're just calming, just being there, maybe with our breath or some other object of meditation like sound or something, and then let everyone know that now is a moment when we're going to start to get ready to do some physical activity, and just invite people to notice like what thoughts, emotions, physical sensations arise as they know they're about to do some physical activity, and just seeing what's here. So for some people, they're like excited, and other people there's like dread. Other people or
Yeah.
thoughts are coming up like it's
Yeah.
dark outside or whatever it is. And we're not, part of mindfulness is like non-judgmental awareness. So we're just aware of our thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, but in a non-judgmental way with curiosity, acceptance, gentleness. So if we know we're about to do physical activity, what's there, and we're coming to know ourselves a little bit. And then we invite people to actually start the physical activity for about 20 minutes. Do a bit of a warm up and then do the physical activity. Often it's like encouraged to be like a walk or a jog if they're able to do that kind of thing, often outside. But not with anyone else for this meditation, because we're trying to help them kind of connect within. So during the exercise itself, we're inviting them to check in also with their thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and to respond. And so, for some people, when they're getting physical activity, they're just like hammering, and they're actually going harder than necessary, and maybe even harder than what's good for their body. But they feel like no pain, no gain, and can maybe start to dislike physical activity because of that.
Yeah.
And so can we bring our awareness to our thoughts, emotions, physical sensations that are maybe saying, actually, you're maybe going a little too hard and pull back. And other people aren't going hard enough.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of boring because they're just like going through the motions. And so what happens when they pick it up? And then there's, as many ways to be physically active as there are people in the world. And so part of mindfulness is to notice how we feel when we're doing different forms of physical activity in different ways. And each of us has a different body. Each of us has different constraints we're working with. Each of us has different natural strengths and stuff. And so how do we harness all that to maximize the positive emotions, physical sensations, thoughts? And that's going to be a unique recipe for each of us. And so that's what we're training people to do, is to really enhance their self-awareness, but then also their kind of attention control to like place their minds where they choose to, which can be on doing the activities that bring the most joy. And then when they come back from that mindfulness exercise, we, invite everyone to, after they've cooled down and stuff, I'm like, raise your hand if you're feeling better now than before you exercise. And like 95% of people put their hand up. Not everyone, but like 19 out of 20 do.
Yeah.
And so just about everybody feels better after physical activity, often for hours. And so part of mindfulness practice is to just notice that this present moment is influenced by prior moments, including the physical activity that we've had, as well as what we've eaten or what we, consumed in the alcohol or drug direction, or how much we've slept, or who we've interacted with. So this present moment is influenced by prior moments, including, say, the physical activity. And so that's sort of the arc that we bring people through with mindfulness physical activity approaches, is to just notice our thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, which is basically the entirety of the human experience, before, during, and after physical activity, to be able to just see what's there and to continue to refine it, to build something that supports us and brings joy and happiness and well-being.
Yeah. That is such a different thing to try for, for me, it's the first time I'm hearing this, like the warm up that you mentioned, it sounded like a meditation kind of warm up. It's not the regular warm up that people would think about. So very, very different. And yeah, like when you mentioned that for some people, it's like, they dread it. I was like laughing so hard because it's so true. I think I even talked to colleagues in the studio like not long ago about, like let's have a moment to meditate, and then immediately everyone was like talking because they couldn't go through it. So it was a guided meditation, no less. So that was really hilarious. And I think for a lot of us, it's different, right? Because that's why I talk to you, rather than talk about the definition, we all know what physical recreation exercises mean, and what we need to do. And for each of us, we have different kinds of activities. But in the context of what we're talking about, it's so different to approach it from the lens of mindfulness, where you actually build it into the activity. And I think you said 95% of the people that participated, they enjoyed it, and that definitely is really awesome to hear. But
Or at least they felt better
yeah,
after. They didn't necessarily enjoy it
okay,
during.
they did
People
enjoy it. They felt
it's
better.
like a mix,
Okay.
but just about everybody feels better after it's
Okay,
done
sorry.
for a while.
Sorry, I mixed that up. But yeah, so at least 95% of them felt better, even if they did enjoy it. So I guess my question here is, given that data point, given the the activity that you mentioned, this is new for a lot of people. Let's convince them. I would like to convince them to actually start trying it. So, how do you think this would affect our level of well-being or our well-being in general?
Hmm. Yeah, well, maybe like looping back to when we began our conversation, I talked about that calligraphy by Thich Nhat Hanh that says understanding is the foundation of love. So if we start to just like understand the body and the mind, um, so like if we look at this moment in history, uh, humans are, as a whole, are much more sedentary than they have been in the past. And, so many of our jobs now are sedentary. So many of our pastimes are sedentary. Like people watch on average, 8 hours of screens a day. And, and, we no longer really have to wash our own clothes by hand, or we don't have to walk to go get water. We don't have to, hunt for our food or gather our food. So life is very sedentary. But the body, up until 100 years ago, we were designed to rest when we can, because we had such active lives. So that if we can rest, then rest so that we're stronger when we have to chase that antelope, or when we have to go, carry all this water, all this firewood. And so if after a hard day of work or whatever it is, we feel the desire to rest, genetically and anthropologically, we're kind of set up to do that. And if we feel like we're physically out of shape, well, we're in really good company with the majority of humans at this moment in history. And so that sort of understanding is the foundation. Love part is this: if we can understand and not judge ourselves for how we are in this moment, there's lots of causes and conditions that went into it. If we were the same human 300 years ago, we'd probably be buff.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, here we are,
Yeah.
at this time in history, and
Yeah.
we might be out of shape, and so is just about everyone else.
Yeah. That's so
So
true.
sometimes it's like, mindfulness is like that non-judgmental, curious piece. So not judging ourselves for wherever we're at physically and coming to accept it. And then that's like ground zero.
Hmm.
And then, if we feel the desire to be more fit, which many of us do, then can we really kind of lean into that and let that feeling come stronger? So like with the mindfulness programs that I've developed for young adults and with blood pressure control too, when we set goals, we're often like encouraging people to like not set a goal like with their mind, but almost more with their entire self. So like, what's deep within that just wants to come out. So say for me, I do feel pretty strongly that I like to be fit and I like to be strong. I'm happier and I'm healthier because of it. And so can I just let that express out? And so even for the listeners, inviting you to just check in with yourself about what is your true self, like underneath all the noise, what's there and what wants to come out. And do you want to be stronger and more fit? And if so, really let that express. And then we can kind of harness that energy to become more fit. And so then say, if that energy is there, and maybe that, I don't know for the listeners if it is there, but if it is, then the question is like how? And and that's an answer that each of us is going to answer differently. So like say some people like are really practical. Like my dad, he is not interested really in like going to a gym or anything,
Yeah.
but he has a sizable yard that requires a lot of mowing of the grass and a lot of picking fruit, a lot of gardening, a lot of home maintenance. and he does that about 6 hours a day, and he's retired, and so that's his form of physical activity. It's very practical, and it takes care of our home and our family and brings food on the table. And then other folks, like say my wife, she has been a really competitive athlete on team sports, like ultimate frisbee and lacrosse and soccer. And she just loves the social dynamics and what a group of people can do that an individual can't. And it's just amazing to see what can happen. And that just fills her up. And then for me, I like to do things like with one or two friends, and particularly in nature, that has a bit of like a adrenaline rush. So for me, it's like surfing and rock climbing, and I do like running too. And so, that's just three people, but there's, billions of people in the world. And so what
Yeah.
is it for you to express out?
Yeah.
And then once we can find those ways and even experiment like Gandhi did in his life, just try this particular way of moving or that particular way, how does it go? And then over time, we can find something that's allowing us to become who we truly are, harnessing that energy and getting that positive feedback of how we actually feel better when we do it. And so
Yeah.
that's sort of how I approach it anyway with our programs.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point because I totally agree with all your points that you just mentioned, especially about the sedentary lifestyle. And in fact, I think um, when I talk to my team, for example, my friends, we all talk about the same thing. Like sure we can buy a standing desk, but that's not going to solve the problem because we are still stuck inside.
Mm-hmm.
We're not actually active, be in nature. We're not mindful because when you look at screens and multitask or you open multiple screen, it's kind of like I don't know about you, I don't know about other people, but I just get this sense of overwhelm. And I used to be really proud of myself. Like, I never get headaches, never. And then, you know, one day I just stare at one screen, not even two, and I got a headache
Yeah.
after like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, 2 hours. So it's just so interesting to figure out different ways that you can enjoy these, physical activities, right? Because you're so right. We're different. What I enjoy might not be something
Mm-hmm.
that my best friend would enjoy, might not be something that you would enjoy. I have never, I mean, I've surfed once and that's it because I'm in the CBD of Melbourne. There's no other place there's no place I could go to surf right here. But yeah,
Yeah.
like, like the condition of where you're living, how you are, your circles, all that sort of things, what you enjoy. Introverts might enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
like going for runs alone. Extroverts might enjoy running with a group. So it's so different, but it definitely helps as long, and like you said, right? We just need to figure out what it is in the first place to enjoy it, and to be
Mm-hmm.
able to increase our, to work on our well-being. It's not about, yeah, I see that a lot of people are going on runs, I'm going to do that. It's not about that. It's about
Mm-hmm.
what works for you. And that's what I love the
Yeah.
most about the conversations that we've been having recently over the world about, exercising. Like, what works for you? What do you enjoy? So there are so many different
Mm-hmm.
forms of exercising and activities. Even gardening, like you said, could be, like,
Mm-hmm.
working on something so practical. I really enjoy that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the most evidence-based forms of physical activity that has big impacts on health is walking. Just as simple as that. And so for me, like my parking spot is about a half mile from my job. And I could get a parking spot closer, but I keep it the longer one. and,
Yeah.
and, you know,
Yeah,
I get a mile
totally.
walking that way. So it's just sort of like,
Yeah, that's so smart.
you know, just kind of finding the ways that match who we are.
Yeah.
I'm also sort of a bit in the practical side of things. Like I
Yeah.
do like trying to fit it into day-to-day life. But another thing that people sometimes, and myself included, can think like I don't have time, like, and there is a certain amount of privilege, including that I personally have, that I want to recognize, because I only have one job, and many people have multiple jobs, and physical activity isn't so easy. Like if you live in a high crime neighborhood in an apartment or something. So I want to check, privilege with the ability to be physically active. And then at the same time, when we're trying to think like, do I have time for it? For me, sometimes I find it actually like kind of creates time, and that I have more energy and I'm more grounded and in a better mental place so that I make better decisions and I'm less likely to get caught down some kind of wormhole. Um, so like yesterday, I had quite a bit of stress. We had some data analyses that had been showing this pretty strong association, and then our statistician recommended we look at it in a different way, and like the association was completely wiped out, and uh, this was about to be published.
Oh
And so
no.
I was very stressed because
Oh
I
no.
pride myself in really high quality methods,
Yeah.
and so we started to drill into what was going on. We thought we maybe found a mistake in one of the variables that was being used, and my statistician, has 3 kids, and he's like, I can't work on it tonight, and I'm like, fine, fine,
Yeah.
and so I was like quite stressed about how that was going to work out, and so in the morning, I could have had a cup of coffee and like bang through some work or something, and coffee makes me kind of anxious, but instead I went and got some physical activity in nature, and by the time I had that time out in nature with some friends and beautiful day and out on the ocean, and then came back to an email that showed that it was indeed a mistake with the variable and the analyses were just fine. And so I saved
Yay.
myself all this unneeded worry and
Yeah.
instead took care of my body and
Yeah.
actually helped me make better decisions and be more grounded throughout the day. And so
That's such a good point.
I feel like sometimes that can be a question of, do I have time? And sometimes the answer truly is, I do not have time. But sometimes we can question that a little bit,
Yeah.
that might it even make time so that we're
Yeah.
less grumpy and less likely to get into that fight with our loved one that then puts us into 2 hours of arguments and weekly therapy and everything else that takes time?
Yeah.
Or can we just take care of our body
Yeah.
that might prevent some of that stuff from happening in the
Yeah.
first place?
For sure.
And again, it's different for everyone, and I want to recognize my own lens that I'm looking at this through and respect other people's lenses too. But
Yeah. That's a really good
something.
point. Yeah, thank you. I think it has been a very it's a very different kind of topic and very different kind of conversation when it comes to talking about your healthy body, because we're not talking about just this body, we're talking about the mind as well, which is why we're talking about healthy mind and healthy body. And I hope that it has provided our audience with a different way of approaching how they go about their physical activities. And I think it's really helpful to think about mindfulness in this context too, because I definitely believe that it's a new concept to a lot of people. When you think of physical exercise, all you think about is going to the gym, running, like there's no component where you say you build in mindfulness. So there's definitely a difference there. And we got some statistics that were interesting. But to round it out, I would love for you to share a bit more about, perhaps something that's related to your research, about the benefit of, combining these two areas that people so often separate, and because we're talking about, forming behaviors that are healthy for our well-being. What are some of the, maybe interesting facts or statistics or things that we might not have known before, that can help us to truly think about how we can embed this into our routine, and maybe adapt and change our behaviors, because like you said, we are so used to, sitting at our desk. We've had such a sedentary lifestyle. Even us recording this podcast, we're sitting. So, like, how do we go about
Mhm.
changing our mindset in the first place? And, what would be some of the benefits?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, one of the first studies I did in this looked at about 400 participants who had been followed since they were in their mom's wombs and were now in their late 40s. And we were looking at like early life determinants of cardiovascular health and epigenetics and stuff, but I put in a mindfulness questionnaire in the study, and we started to see that people with higher levels of mindfulness had better levels of physical activity. And most of these people weren't even meditating, so it was just everyday mindfulness. Like everyone has a certain amount of awareness of the present moment of their thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. So even however we get it, doesn't mean we have to meditate. But it might help us become more aware of how we feel before, during, and after physical activity, and how we feel in general, and what helps us feel better. And then when we started to intervene in young adults and in older adults, we started to see that actually training up our self-awareness and then directing it towards our relationship with physical activity started to allow people to sit less and move more. I have a colleague, Kirk Erickson at University of Pittsburgh, who does a lot of work on impacts of physical activity on like cognitive function and aging. And so there's getting to be pretty strong evidence around the impacts of physical activity, even on brain function now, not just mood, but actual cognitive abilities.
Yeah.
And so if we think about, the ability for like taking the time to be physically active, and so much of a lot of the workplace now is like in the knowledge kind of industry, and if we can be improving our cognitive abilities, that can be potentially enhancing our work performance and stuff too. And then another area of interest that I'm seeing coming up more and more now is around using mindfulness to actually enhance performance in sports. Like, a lot of professional athletes now are using meditation and mindfulness to like really optimize their performance. And so one way that we see it happening is, in the moment. So say I had a student who was on the varsity squash team at Brown, and was finding just a lot of rumination she was doing between points. With squash, you kind of play a point. It's very strategic. If something goes badly, you can be thinking about that, and then your partner's like serving the next one up, and you're already in play again. And so when she started going through my meditation training with my course, she started to just kind of like focus on one spot on the wall. Like with squash, there's often these marks where the ball hits or whatever, and she'd have one spot that she'd focus, and in between every point, she'd go to that spot with her eyes, focus on it, allow her to just kind of settle and come right into the present moment, and then play that next point. And it started to improve her game. And then she also started to notice how much more she like enjoyed the sport of squash because of the people she got to meet, and it helped remind her of like why she played the game in the first place. And then that helped her kind of train more and stuff because she could feel the enjoyment of this sport that she'd actually picked. And so there's sort of examples of how we can think of like physical recreation that's like more in the pleasurable category, but then there's like physical activity, and then there's like sport. And more and more mindfulness training is being used with like sport and performance to be able to recover from mistakes more quickly, to be right in the moment, in the flow when that game is happening, so that you're really able to respond both to your body and to the environment and to your mind quickly and skillfully.
Yeah.
So those are some of the areas in physical activity that I'm hearing about that I find exciting and interesting right now.
Yeah, super exciting. And yeah, when you mention cognitive function, I think that's, there you go. That's your evidence. Like everyone, if you haven't exercised before, now's the time. Like, there's just no other way to convince people to exercise, right? Because I think I'm guilty of that too. And it's not like I don't know about the benefits, but I guess the main challenge that we all face is these benefits sound amazing. I definitely will. Yeah, I'm determined to exercise. And sometimes when you're tired, you maybe horizontal on your couch, even though a brisk walk might give you a lot of energy. And that's what I'm trying to remind myself too. I'm not perfect. I'm also in that category where I'm tired. I'm just like, I'm just going to be flat here. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And John Kabat-Zinn talks about the times, he says like, the times that we're not practicing mindfulness can be just as informative as the times that we are. But I would also say the times that we're not physically active can be just as informative as the times that we are. So how does it feel? And sometimes the body needs rest.
Yeah.
It's good to give it rest. If we give it a little too much, then just, again, non-judgmentally notice how the body's feeling.
Yeah.
That's good information.
Yeah.
And sometimes that information helps us, with the next skillful step. And even for me, my physical activity ebbs and flows. There's sort of like a average, but, this week with the hurricane and stuff, the waves were up and I was paddling hard and I was also training in the pool and I was also rock climbing and I overdid my shoulder. So now I'm actually in a couple of days where I'm not actually exercising very much right now to allow the body to heal and to care and just
that's true.
Everything kind of ebbs and flows. And
that's true. Totally
it's
agree.
all information.
Yeah, for sure. It's not like we have to exercise when we're, not in the best condition to exercise. It's more so, I think it's a good thing we've learned today to actually find the activities that suit us, find ways that we would enjoy these activities, and find ways to build mindfulness into physical activities. And that way we have healthy mind and healthy body. And I think it takes a lot of work initially, especially for those who are kind of like, oh, I'm not sure what I like, or, like I don't, enjoy mindfulness activities that much because it's dreadful to think about having to sit with my thoughts. So I think personally, I would think this is going to take some work for individuals, but it's going to be very, very beneficial. And I think in the spirit of getting practical, right? We always talk about practice. We want to get practical. And we've already mentioned, like you serve, you try to, build in mindfulness and other ways in the programs that you go about, introducing. But if we were to introduce one practice to our audience that would be something they can try today, what would you introduce to them?
Like a mindfulness practice?
I think maybe we can introduce something that combines mindfulness with a physical activity.
Physical activity.
Yeah, something like that.
I would invite you to try that mindfulness practice I mentioned, where maybe just start. So like maybe get whatever clothing on that would allow you to be active, and then to just sit for a quiet moment, and then bring up, the thought that I'm about to be physically active. Notice what arises: thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and then go be physically active for like 20 minutes or so with a bit of a warm up, and get your heart rate up, but not too high. And just notice thoughts, emotions, physical sensations while you're doing that. Allow the cool down, and then just notice how you feel after you're done. That whole cycle can take 30 minutes, and just observe. And, the guidelines around physical activity talk about, 30 minutes of physical activity, most days of the week kind of thing. And 30 minutes is, it's time, but not so long. And so how does that 30 minutes feel? And just be open to the answer. If it's horrible, that's fine. If it was wonderful, that's fine. If it's somewhere in between, that's fine. But that might be a mindfulness practice that could integrate the two. I wrote a book called The Mindful College Student, and that has that meditation in it. There's like sections on physical activity and physical well-being as well as mental well-being.
That's super interesting. I've meditated, I've exercised, but I've never combined the two. So to me, this is new and something I can totally try. So suppose I go through this, practice of between 20 minutes to 30 minutes. What would be the 3 benefits I would feel afterwards?
Well, I'm often like inviting people to share that with me because it'll be unique to each of us.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I can share what I often hear from others, but it'll be unique for each of us.
Yeah.
One is, physical activities pretty reliably shown to like reduce depressive symptoms, for example, and to improve mood. And so a lot of people report feeling a better mood after physical activity, just happier and more joyful. there might be some insights that arise through it in terms of what aspects of the physical movement bring you happiness and also what brings you down. So sometimes it's like, wow, like that particular route that I walk, along that canal or along that forested path or whatever it is, really, I'm happier when I do that compared to when I walk on a city block. And there's evidence around that walking in nature enhances well-being more than walking in urban areas. So those are a couple things. Another piece might just be noticing like your energy for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And often people report like a higher level of energy for the rest of the day. That's one of the reasons why I often like to exercise first thing in the morning if I can. I find it just kind of sets me up for more energy and a better mood for the rest of the day. But that's just me. It might be different for each of us.
Yeah. And I think that's already a really good start, because even if it's different for each person, hearing what people normally get out of the practice is a really big encouragement for those who've never tried that before. Not just combining mindfulness with physical activities, but also those that have not tried exercising first thing in the morning. I have to say it's been really cold in Melbourne and I haven't done that myself recently. But when it was
Yeah.
summer, I used to do that every day. It's amazing. I just cannot bring
Yeah.
myself to get out of my apartment in the winter because it's so cold
Mm-hmm.
here. But otherwise, I think
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's going to be massively beneficial for everyone. And we should all try. And in fact, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
I'll try, even if it's cold, I'll try and do that even in the cold as well. And I'll report the benefits to you and give you more data into the research if I can.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really good. And now that we've covered the practice, we also have a couple of questions from our audience. I think you touched on this briefly before, but let's talk a bit more about this. So we talked about the sedentary lifestyle of the current context of working and how we are working. But I think a particular audience want to know more about this, because one of our audience asked, are there any practical tips to develop a healthy mind and body for remote working individuals, so they don't have an office, they're completely working remotely?
Yeah. Yeah. I had like one participant who went through a program who worked remotely and did a lot of writing, but she lived in a beautiful area, I think in the Tetons, like in kind of a mountainous region of the United States. And so she had a decent amount of control over her schedule. So she found um, that one was that the mindfulness practice helped her with procrastination a bit, because she'd do a lot of writing, and on her own working remotely, there wouldn't be coworkers there to kind of like give her inspiration and stuff. And so the mindfulness practice helped her just kind of write like just one word at a time, just to get it started and not to think too far ahead, just to go one by one. But she also started to bring more rhythm into her days, like more kind of shorter breaks for mindful physical activity, and there's so many mindful physical activities that we haven't talked about, like that really bridge the two, like yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or martial arts. Like those are like mindful activities that have been developed for generations to bring the two together. So she would often do some yoga as little breaks or go for a walk, and found that interspersing the physical activity through her remote work life gave her just like a better arc to her day. So that might be one way to think about it. Again, it's sort of checking in with us. I'm, as you mentioned, like it's cold in Melbourne right now, and it's going to get cold over here pretty soon too. And the days are already getting shorter, and I find even activities can change depending on the time of year or the timing. So sometimes for me, I'll get up in the morning and work. Like someone who's working remotely can sometimes do that. And then as the light comes up and the warmth comes in, then go get the physical activity outside when it's a bit more comfortable.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of a break
Yeah.
partway through the morning or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So,
Yeah. I think that works too, actually. Yeah. Why would I challenge myself to get out in the cold when I can actually do other things first and then perhaps go out at around noon because, when it's going to be a
mhm,
bit warmer. Actually, that's a good point.
mhm. And it can be like one of those experiments that Gandhi ran, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, how is life when I do it that way? And
Yes.
whatever the answer is fine, you
Yes.
know? And just
Yeah.
keep running those experiments,
Yeah,
including
start a
people who work remotely.
documentary.
And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Do a documentary, start experimenting with all these different kinds of exercising. It's actually one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot. Like how do I build this into my routine? Because the summer is vastly different from the winter. And I just cannot keep the same routine, unfortunately. So yeah, this is a really good point. I
Mhm.
might actually do that. And if I
Mm.
do eventually have a documentary to share, I will.
Sure.
um,
Yeah. Sounds good.
Cool. Okay. So the next question, this is the second and last question is how can we successfully change our behavior to healthy ones? And how can we motivate ourselves so that we don't fall back to the old habits?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I bet that question's shared with like a billion people
Yeah.
in the world, if not more.
Yeah, at least.
And, I had a mindfulness teacher named Joanne Friday who used to talk about how we kind of get addicted to our own brain chemistry. You know, like we have this certain kind of cocktail of neurotransmitters and stuff in our brain that, we just kind of get used to. And life might not be awesome and it might not be terrible, but it's kind of comfortable enough because we're used to it. And then if we do something that makes it worse, well, the cocktail gets worse and we want to at least get back to where we were. Or if we do something better, makes us better, we still sometimes will just want to come back to what we're used to. And that can be one of the challenging parts of behavior change is it's like, especially the older we get, we have so many years of experience of just kind of feeling. And so how do we break through that? And, I guess for me, there's different approaches and different people will talk about it in different ways. I think the framing that I often use is, enhancing our self-awareness. Often, I use mindfulness practices of really enhancing my awareness of my physical sensations, thoughts, emotions. So truly, how do I feel? Um, like I visited my parents-in-law over the weekend and they just moved into a new place, an assisted living place. And it has a really great restaurant. We went there with my family and we had this huge meal. And I usually don't really drink much alcohol, but I had a beer. Then I had like a big slice of apple pie and like kind of a heavy meal. And it was really nice to be with family and I enjoyed the
Yeah.
moment. And then the next day I was just kind of sluggish. And so part of like that self-awareness is just non-judgmentally just feel how we feel. And then once we start to feel better, can we really let that sink in? And then with our power of like attention control that can come through meditation training, can we keep on moving towards that like kind of guiding light, like that North Star? And also know sometimes we're going to fall. And can we just fall well? Like one of my daughters is just a remarkable climber, rock climbing and tree climbing. And when she falls, which isn't often, she lands incredibly well. It's very rare for her to get hurt. And then she just kind of gets up and keeps on moving. And so for me, like I generally don't drink alcohol, but every so often I will. And if I fall, because I can kind of crave it after, which is not healthy and for me. And so can I just fall well, see how I feel, learn from it, and then move on. So I think that's part of it with behavior change or being more physically active is there's going to be times when we're just going to binge watch some movies or something or just not go out. It's going to be cold or whatever's up, we're sick,
Yeah.
lazy, whatever. It's okay, it happens to all of us. And how do we land from that and keep moving forward to become who we truly are,
Yeah.
which is often a pretty self-expressed person.
Yeah, I think it's so true what you just said, and I guess the message here is to definitely work on those good habits, but also allow yourself the space to take breaks sometimes. It's not, like every single day you have to keep that up, because if you're unwell today, there's no point in getting a run in because you're sick, right? So obviously on those
Mm-hmm.
days, allow yourself to take breaks. And I think because we're talking about healthy mind and healthy bodies, there will be days where you feel distressed and the last thing you want is to go out. So you can find other ways to nurture your well-being, and your exercises can wait until the next day. They're never going to go anywhere. I think it's just more so keeping that in mind, and having that intention of like, I'm going to try to be as active as I can and bring in mindfulness as much as I can. And I also allow myself the space to take breaks when I need them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. That's such a nice ending to our conversation about the topic of healthy mind and healthy body, and all the adapting behaviors that is always challenging. And I believe there will be so much more to talk about, but let's close it here. And before we let you go, I would love to ask you to share about something that you're super passionate about. We've covered quite a bit today, but we have this section in our show called Open Mic towards the end, because we always want to invite our wonderful experts to share. Maybe this is something so personal to you, and you're probably passionate about so many different things. So here's your stage. Eric, please share with us.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that's really up for me about passion is just human relationships. I think like during the pandemic, became like really closer with like my wife and my twin daughters, and just thinking about my relationship with them, including with my daughters as they're getting like they're preteen now, and their minds are really developing, and it's just so neat to see who they're becoming and to play around with them and to interact with them almost more as like starting to become more like peers almost as they get older. But then also, as we're at this phase of the pandemic where we're engaging more, I'm at work now 4 days a week, and we had the first social gathering at the Mindfulness Center at Brown yesterday, the first like in-person one since before the pandemic, and just seeing the joy, feeling the joy both in myself, but also in the students and faculty and staff as we're coming together. Just the value of human relationships has been an area of passion for me right now, especially at this phase, as where I'm feeling more kind of in-person interactions as I'm more back in the physical workplace and stuff, and still very much connected to my family too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think human relationships is probably something that I don't believe we can ever stop studying. It's just, there's so much to that. And yeah, it's so nice to see that you have such a nice relationship with your family after the pandemic. I've actually seen a lot of families getting closer. I myself wasn't able to, be with my family because I'm in Australia and my family is in Vietnam. So we are apart, and like I was living alone throughout the pandemic. But I actually agree with you in the front of the closeness of the relationship that actually definitely improved, because there was no other distraction. There was no like, oh, like go here, go there, please come to this, come to that, or it's because we were going through the same thing. We actually bonded and spent quality time. So it's not like like, oh, like let's call and call again and just talk about nothing, or like talk about the same thing as before, but actually like spend time to think about the quality and the essence of the relationship. And that was really nice. So really good to hear about that, Eric. And it's a really nice close to this, even though a bit different from the topic, but definitely a really nice ending to this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the podcast, and wishing the best with the podcast, and really enjoyed our conversation with each other too. So thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.